Today is the 20th day of October, 2014, and we are with Dr. Alok Pandey once again.
Good evening, namaste.
Today I wanted to mention harmony in this book, Flowers and Their Messages, which is actually the title given by Mother. And she speaks of, she names many flowers that carry the significance of harmony. But there's one, the hydrangea, and that is collective harmony. Mother says collective harmony is the work undertaken by the divine consciousness. It alone has the power to realize it. Now, reading Sri Aurobindo in his social and political thought, he speaks most beautifully and eloquently about the League of Nations and what he sees that it should be and how it has been formed and everything. But just some years ago, the United Nations had its 60th birthday. And it was on, I believe, on the cover of Time magazine, and it says 60 years of failure.
Yes.
60 years of failure. So, and now we have Putin threatening with nuclear warheads. Collective harmony.
Before we get into it, your comment reminded me about the recent meeting which took place maybe a few weeks back in America, and the Indian Prime Minister was there.
Oh, yes.
And he made a very interesting comment that next year we'll be celebrating 70 years for the United Nations. And it is a time to introspect and reflect how far we have really succeeded in the mission. It was a very interesting statement because I think with harmony, as with everything else, we try to sort out things only on the surface. That's one of the big problems of human nature. We are externalized, these are endowment from the animals, that we are gazing at life and world only with the external senses, taking the inputs. Based on the input of the senses, we create differentiations, we create walls, all kinds of things. But human beings are endowed with a unique capacity to look inside. And I think that really marks them distinct from the animal kind. This capacity to look inside into a subjective space and, work out things from there. So, this aspect, one of the work which the divine has undertaken, unity in diversity. Now here again what happens is that we identify with few elements in nature and we almost define ourselves by that. This is a common phrase, how do you define yourself? So basically when we define, we limit ourselves. I was reading very interestingly something which A.B. Purani saw in Sri Aurobindo, and then he says, I was reminded of what Sri Aurobindo wrote in Essays on the Gita, that what will be the supramental personality like? And he says it will be like an impersonal universality. Now the problem of human nature is we are just the opposite. Our personality is more like an imposition of nature's barriers, and whatever is in affinity with that, we form natural groups. Whatever is not in affinity with that, we try to at worst eliminate, at best tolerate. But tolerating things or even trying to create some kind of an understanding by a superficial exchange of views, all these are fine human methods because we rely on those methods of which we are aware. But always such kind of a harmony is always precarious because deep inside the schism exists and it erupts. It erupts as the slightest provocation. And even when people are in affinity, the classic example is, I think Mother said in a very interesting way, as you know, she had a very subtle sense of humor. Sri Aurobindo has said that. She said, one of the miracles for me is that, keeping 1,200 people who are so different together in an ashram. and and it's not a joke if you really come to think of it. Even where people are on the same path towards the same goal, forget about where there are surface differences. Even when deep inside you are rooted in something, at least we are expected to be rooted. Hopefully we are rooted. Big question mark. But nevertheless, let's let's give each other a fair chance that we are all on the same path towards the same goal. When I say path in a broad sense, there are different ways of approaching it. And yet, there is so much of challenges towards creating harmony. Now, when we look at, now why I am bringing this factor of ashram and the mother, because it directly reaches that point. Now, when we look at, say, 50 years, 60 years back, when mother and Sri Aurobindo were in physical body, how did this harmony work out? Which I must say that, is so much more difficult now. Let's, be very realistic about things.
Nini writes about that
Yeah,
also.
yeah.
Yes, much more difficult.
So why was it, people who couldn't look at each other eyeball to eyeball were yet held together. And if I have to look at the one single factor that held people together, apart from the divine persona of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, it is the mother's love. And I have it's my understanding that when Sri Aurobindo said that the work we are waiting for the mother, and he specifically mentioned the collective work, and no wonder the ashram she was given in charge of, other aspects of yogic guidance could be given. But who would embody that love, which like a magnet would hold people together? And even now, to an extent, it operates, though in a different way. Of course, for those who can feel it very personally, the blessed ones, the lucky one, the fortunate ones, there is no problem. But otherwise, even when people are very unhappy with each other, they still want to stay here. There is something in the atmosphere like a magic, incense, burning, which draws. So, when we speak about the divine creating harmony, divine alone creating harmony, it means that humanity should be able to feel a little bit of that love which is at the back of creation. In Indian mythology, it's very interesting that the being who holds the march of humanity together has been termed Krishna. Now, leaving aside the mythical aspects of Krishna and the stories and legends and the cults, talk about that. But the word Krishna comes from the same root as it means to draw. So akarshan, it's a word in Sanskrit, to draw together, to draw close. And by the very fact of divine presence, it draws together. How people respond from their psychic being. And that little touch is enough to at least hold so many persons who are so different. As much as anyone else. I think much more that people who take to this yoga, most of them are highly individualized. That means they have reached a fairly high degree of ego development, ego individuality, because without that, to start with, it's not even possible to go into yoga. So it's a paradox that there is a kind of harmony at a mass level. So, everybody is crying for ministers going to jail or release. No, that's not harmony. Many people feel that that's harmony. Thousands and thousands of people together, maybe lakhs, and they are moved by a common sentiment. Let's take the freedom struggle of India. Suddenly a whole mass of people were moved by a common sentiment. Now, common sentiment, common ideal, common work, they will create a temporary state which will resemble like a harmony, because everybody is together. It's like when you are stuck in a difficult situation, so everybody has to come together and face that difficulty. But the moment that moment is gone, the inner differences come up. This is the big problem. And they come up because temporarily this ego was subdued because of common interest. Like, what happens in the business sector. People are moved by common interest, and whatever they may talk behind the person, on the surface there is the facade of a good smile and taking care of each other's interests. Now, this is not harmony. So when Mother and Sri Aurobindo speak of harmony, It is something so much more profound. It's not blurring out the distinctions, it's not being moved by a common factor in life, it's not about common interest, it's not about mutual association, but it's about a sincere, not just a sincere will to create harmony, but a sincere opening towards that source, that love which sustains the world. It's a very big challenge. At one place, the mother says, and Shobinda said, the big challenge is the ego.
Yeah.
It is the adversary. And so long as men live by the ego, not only divine love cannot really manifest in the world, but whatever we may do, whatever systems, structures, institutions, they will always break down. And that is a big challenge.
With all that Mother and Sri Aurobindo have done for us, Mother still had to say in 1967, men, countries, continents, the choice is imperative, truth or the abyss.
Absolutely. And that's where, actually, I'm so glad you mentioned this, because I was just, contemplating about that. I think yesterday, 2 days back, I was reading this very interesting thing that only divine love can eventually transform this world and create a collective harmony together. But she says divine love cannot manifest unless at first there is the basis of truth.
Yes.
And Shobindu writes this in a letter to Dilip Kumar Roy, because quite naturally when he came, he was a bhakta, very emotional, sensitive, sentimental, of course very intellectually developed artist,
Consciousness, yes.
Intellectually also a very
Yes.
developed
Yes.
person, so very interesting combination, very complex human being. And he was struck by a fact or an observation that, we are all here together for the same purpose. There should be bonhomie, there should be love, there should be, all the kind of sentimental exchanges, pleasantries, etc. And Shobindu had to repeatedly remind him that to bring down, there is a very famous letter, to bring down the divine love and ananda is what we are also striving for. It is the aim put forward by Sri Krishna. But we have found by our experience that it cannot come down or stay unless divine truth establishes itself as a basis. So I suppose right now what we are seeing is not the harmony aspect, but the intense struggle between truth and all that must go away, be integrated back into the animal kind. Humanity had several layers of evolution which are behind us, and many of us have come up simply because of the collective pressure. But in our consciousness, the other day you were mentioning about ISIS. What is it in consciousness? Brute. Absolutely brute. I mean, probably the Rakshasa would be better.
Yeah.
When you read the stories, they ate when they were hungry. But who are these people? Are they humans? If we say they are humans, then, humans are not just a question of 2 eyes and 1 nose and, human features. Bhartari, who was a great tantric yogi, and Shobindu has, even translated his Niti Shatikam. So he says at one place that there are a lot of animals who don't have horns and don't have a tail and don't eat grass. Now it may sound very extreme statement, and no doubt the fact of taking a human body means something. But at the same time, there is a whole chunk of humanity which is living by the ego, for the ego, and doesn't want to see anything beyond. You were talking about the missiles, and for them nothing else matters. Now, if you try to create harmony by any external means, this kind of humanity will invariably use your resources, speak nice things, and ultimately cater to their own ego interest. And that's what happened first to the League of Nations,
Yes.
born out of a very noble sentiment, and First World War. It was a gift, passing gift of the First World War.
Right.
There were many interesting gifts of the First World War, feminist movement, the recognition that women are as strong as men. This was a good gift. War always leaves, like we have in India, that after the Mahabharata war, thanks to that, the Gita was born. So something good emerges. So one of them was the League of Nations. The first impulse that can we really live like this? It's very unfortunate that mankind needs extreme situations to realize something which is so evident. So we have to go through quarrels, war, so much, distrust, suspicion, and after all this, we feel, oh, this is not the way we should have lived. So I think the same thing happens at a collective level. So the League of Nations, as a result of the First World War, obviously turned out to be a facade. And it was, of course, drafted in a very imperfect way because, there were exigencies. It was more to probably ensure that, at least a few nations don't enter into the kind of situations in which they were caught up. The United Nations, a little more, at least, sincere because the birth was amidst far greater, far worse situations. So, initial movement, because they faced a common danger, was very good, the initial impulse. But what happened later on, Sri Aurobindo pointed out in his postscript chapter on, United Nations Organization, that we have to safeguard that it doesn't become, a new bottle, but the same old wine, where few nations hold sway because of the power they, and it's for the interest of the few nations that the other nations really, have to toe the line. Now, for whatever reasons we see in this, the 5 vetoing nations, one cannot say that any of them are really sincere.
Yeah.
And imagine if one of them goes stray, there is a big possibility. I don't mind openly speaking. Forget about Russia. Look at China.
Yes.
And what do you do with that kind of a nation being among the vetoing nations?
Yeah.
Now, it's a very dangerous situation, and Sri Aurobindo foresaw it. When United Nations took the side of Pakistan vis-a-vis India, you know what Mother commented? This is, I think, obviously after 65 or was it 71? I forget exactly, but she said, oh, the United Nations, they are being totally governed by falsehood. They have already decided to take the side of Pakistan without even understanding the cause of India. But Sri Aurobindo in his postscript chapter saw hope. He said all, that line from Savitri, as in a dark beginning of all things. So everything starts like that. So I suppose if you look at 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, it is nothing in the life of a aspiration. And I feel that this, what happened this year, I do believe that prophecy about 2012, the world entering into a cataclysmic state, I think this is about an inner change, the death of the old world. It's not about something happening externally. And I feel that changes are taking place, and they are taking place in 2 ways. One, when someone almost spoke as if giving to the United Nations a conscience that, look, we need to look inside, introspect. As a committee of nations, where are we really going? Where are we heading? All right, you have a meeting one every year, you pass some resolutions, you fight against Ebola, and all that is good. But where are we heading in terms of the true harmony? So this is one very good factor. The second thing, and that's where the paradox comes in, that the pressure comes when, the pressure to change comes when humanity suddenly sees the prospect of entering into the abyss. So that's where ISIS and the missiles do their work. They push humanity to reflect because, we are suddenly thrown out of the comfort zones. What if ISIS is at the doorsteps of India? It is, in fact. In Kashmir, there were, ISIS flags shown.
Yeah.
Can we still afford to be insincere and continue to, take the sides of what is false? Now, this churning is going on even in Islam. Now, I have been reading a lot of literature which is going around. This American correspondent Fareed Zakaria, for instance, very nicely, yes.
So his interview
was very good, and he's coming, and lot of such people are beginning to speak up. That look, we need to acknowledge the problems, the issues, and we have to filter out the essence. and discard all that is peripheries, non-essentials, all over the world, whether it is in the form of religion, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Sikhism. There's a whole encrustation, a whole mass of things which needs to be discarded. And we have to carry the essence. Same thing about the life of nations. A nation unit formed to defend against other nations is one thought. And I think it's a very negative way. It's an important thing, but a very negative way. A nation unit for common interest, for common goals, begins to become better. But a nation unit meant to express a unique mode of the divine, I think that's where humanity has to reach. And I hope that some such nations shows the way. I think, I don't know whether last time I mentioned or not, but in my class I was speaking about it. If you look at Russia, America and India, you see Mother wanted Russia and America
Yes.
and India to come together. Speak about it in America, speak about it in Russia, and you know the response. There's still so much of mutual suspicion and distrust. But you see, if you look deeper, America represents the spirit of freedom. However, it may be misunderstood or disguised, but the spirit of freedom is necessary for the new world. You can't, do without it. Russia represents the spirit of brotherhood. That's how, the socialism, the communism has worked. But it has broken because it was on a wrong basis. It was on a purely Asuric basis of biological togetherness. And India represents the spirit of unity. And that's why India is plagued with so many kinds of divergent strands of humanity. And the day America understands what true freedom is, it's not just giving expression to your ego self, but to, discover the freedom of the spirit, the power to make the right choices, even at the national level. And I think they are reaching that point. They're somewhere feeling the way or being led by the divine, despite whatever the appearances may be. The day Russia understands that true brotherhood is not something external, but it is based on something much deeper, by discovering the essence of humanity. And the day India understands what true unity is, it's not about percentage figures and democratically putting people together in a potpourri, but to again go back to that divine aspect, the divine essence, which is manifesting in varied ways. Then these countries will automatically come together. In fact, I feel they will come together even regardless of anything, because when this question was asked about Third World War, the mother said that humanity may reach that point, but it will not happen. In fact, she didn't say categorically, but she says, let us hope that the presence of the supermind. Yeah. Because earlier Sri Aurobindo had written a very interesting letter in the late 30s to a disciple that this much is sure, that the earth will be saved.
Yes.
Whether humanity will be saved or not is a question that is left hanging.
Yes.
And the mother also has left it hanging.
Yes.
So when mother was asked later on, I think in the 60s, is it still hanging? Mother didn't say anything. She just laughed and remained silent. Very powerful silence. So I suppose both aspects, on one side, changes that are taking place. Another thing which is very interesting, which is happening up. See, human beings are getting close together in ways which are transcending national boundaries. And I think it's a very good movement. It's very unexpected, and I think probably it's not the parliaments which will bring unity and harmony. It is the common so-called ordinary person. People who are moved by Mark, what is his name, Facebook fellow, they will come together, and now, a common aspiration towards peace, harmony, understanding, transcultural marriages, transcultural movements, these will bring together because there will be quite naturally a common understanding of the depths. You see, one of the problems with Russia has been that Russia is not at all open to people who come from outside. I mean, you know very well, even the visa is for a very limited period, and you know,
Yeah, 2 weeks. 3
2 weeks, precise period. And it's like you get a feeling you're not really welcome.
Yeah.
You need to know Russian to live there. Now, obviously, on one side, it has dreamed of brotherhood at whatever level. At another side, if you remain so closed, how will things move? So, you know, every nation will go through its own challenges. Similarly, in India, you talk about Vasudev Kutumbam, the divine, all world is divine family. Then you fight between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, as if they are two different nations.
Yeah.
Now, you know, on one side, truth, other side, abyss. Similarly, in America, freedom, liberty. But then, you know, when you talk about liberty and freedom, you have to respect it everywhere. And, you have to discover its real basis. So I think all these events are exposing the chinks in our armor in the hour of God.
Yes.
And maybe we'll get many blows. Doesn't matter, because divine doesn't work in one lifespan. But this much I'm sure that the collective harmony is bound to come, because humanity has no other way. We have no other choice.
Do you feel that in the present situation, India and America are becoming closer?
Yes, and paradoxically, again, through such events like the 9/11, it's a very unfortunate way to come close together. But the mother not only foresaw it, she felt its absolute imperative necessity. Because India represents, it's a reservoir of spiritual energy which runs in its streams, whereas America is a reservoir of solid material power in its most, condensed form. And this material energy opening to the spiritual touch, this spiritual energy expressing itself through the power of matter,
Yes.
would create a new world. I mean, their coming together is destined and imperative. Whatever may be, the differences on the surface, and I think it is happening. See, it's interesting to see the way the Indian diaspora has, gone to America, and slowly there was this interesting article some time back in America that are we all turning Hindus? Of course, the article is a catchphrase, and that apart. But many Americans hold very similar beliefs as those of people who are having this background of Sanatan Dharma. Leave aside many believe in rebirth, many believe in God who is though one but expresses in multiple ways. So I think American society is, the Indian thought, the deeper Indian thought is very slowly but in a very solid way percolating into the mainstream American thought, without realizing it. And that's why the resistance is also coming up. And we don't talk about that, the distortions of what India is. And,
Right.
that's not a healthy side. But I believe they are a handful. By and large, the common man, let's talk of that, is really, those thoughts are just seeping in from where we don't know. And situations and circumstances are developing that are bringing these two nations together. The mother at one point even said that it's so important, but a lot of, the American politics is still under the influence of the adverse forces. But that was, of course, way back in the 60s, when the equation was such that America would blindly support Pakistan. Things have
But
changed.
she, I believe, was working through Kennedy.
Yes. And so when Kennedy died, she said it was a
Yes.
occult death. But that was also a world when supramental had not yet established its roots upon earth
Yes.
in a concrete way. I mean, it had descended, but it was
Right.
still in infancy. And for instance, in 50s, the mother said, I wanted, later on she says, and then she connects to an event in the 50s. In the 60s, she says, I need just one man, not a party, not a group. One man, she's speaking about the Indian context, one man who is receptive and courageous and sincere and who can work out things. And then she says, where is that one man? And then she says, there was one. He had come for the convocation, which took place, Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education, International University Center. That time it was called like that. You know who was this man, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee? He also died a very strange death. He went to Kashmir saying that it's my free country and I can travel anywhere. And he was arrested, incarcerated. He died a very mysterious death. And the mother said he was assassinated. See, this story went around. Now, it's very interesting that these instruments which came up in the beginning, and there was a moment when India and America could come close together, and Kennedy was the chief instrument. But at that point of time, it seems Indian Prime Minister didn't respond. And it's documented now. It's part of common history that Kennedy, who very much was impressed and wanted India and America to work closely, was very unimpressed after meeting Jawaharlal Nehru. In fact, he said he was a very tired man, not interested at all in anything. He had his own ideas of socialism. And that was a moment. And I feel such moments come again. So this is 60s, early 60s, 61, around that. So if you take it now,
50 years.
50 years. So the moment has come again.
Yep.
And I hope we don't lose it. Because if you lose it, another 50 years, lot of things, unfortunate things.
Now we still have China and Russia
Yes.
against that
Absolutely.
unity.
Absolutely. And particularly Russia it's very important for Russia, America and India to come together. And I feel India can play a role in bridging the two together. China is a very, it's as we can say, the wild card in the hands of the whatever forces we may want to. And the mother, was very worried, and she was not at all comfortable about the Chinese in general, not about Chinese philosophy in those days. But there is a lot of mixture which has taken place. And I feel that if Russia, India, America, and on the other side Japan, these countries can come together, I think China may not be fully part of a kind of a total world harmony, but just be with the line. And I think that would be good enough to...
And I feel that seed is
germinating. That seed is germinating.
Yeah.
So I feel a lot of hope in that Sri Aurobindo, when he wrote about United Nations Organization, that postscript chapter, he ended with a lot of hope.
Yes.
So obviously he had a vision of that, and he said that, that's how things start. And people come close together, and over a period of time, they are bound to grow. And only issue, which, that's where we all feel a bit sad at times, that we have to go through so much pain, suffering, struggle, unnecessary loss, war, battle, plunder, to reach that point of becoming receptive to the divine love, which is always there. That's the sad part. But I guess that's how animal creation has to be left behind, and evolution is like that. A lot of pain and struggle. The emergence of the butterfly from the caterpillar.
Right.
So the problem comes back to the same thing, that the ego must die. And I feel, and not just die, but be replaced by the true psychic individuality. And often then I come back always to this point, that what can I do? Is there a way that I can contribute to it? Because it's fine that things are moving at a global level. Now, I feel that every individual who in his own little sphere of life can radiate that psychic love, that psychic feeling, that psychic connection with creation, will facilitate the process. Be it in America, be it in India, be it in Russia. And such individuals are growing up. And particularly I must say that I feel that is one of the work that the growing Sri Aurobindo communities have to do. It's a pressing necessity to bring out the psychic, rather than simply living all in the mind and try to over intellectualize things, to bring out the psychic and connect with the world with the psychic feeling. And each one who does it will actually end up facilitating the large scale movement of forces. He'll be like the little butterfly flapping the wings
Yes.
to build up a storm.
Nolini made one comment that was so interesting. He said, the Superman is already amongst you.
Yes.
And then he says, it could be me, it could even be you.
Yes. It could be just round the corner.
And it could be just around the corner. And maybe next time we could talk about the overman, the
Yes.
Suram consciousness,
Yes, we can talk about that.
the transition.
And the new consciousness,
Yes.
the transition, and
Let's
how
do
things
that
are
for
moving.
next.
There'll be more moving in that positive direction.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.